Tonight, we uncover the darkest instruments ever designed to break the human spirit. These were not weapons of war, but of control, crafted in silence, wielded in secrecy, and often used against women accused of sins they never committed. From iron claws to devices that mocked motherhood, these tools of the Spanish Inquisition reveal a truth more horrifying than death itself: cruelty, sanctified by faith. In the late 15th century, as the Spanish Inquisition spread across Europe, fear became a weapon far sharper than any blade. For many women, accusations of witchcraft, blasphemy, or even simple defiance were enough to seal their fate. The Inquisition was not merely about punishing heresy, it was about control, about bending entire populations to the will of church and crown. And for women, this meant that their very existence was placed under suspicion. The tribunal claimed to defend purity, faith, and moral order. But beneath these words lay a campaign of surveillance, humiliation, and violence. Any woman who strayed from rigid rules of obedience could become a target. A healer accused of sorcery, a widow accused of sin, a mother accused of passing down unclean traditions. It was not truth that mattered, but the fear created by the possibility of being accused. Trials were rarely about evidence. A whisper of scandal, a jealous neighbor, a rival within the community, all could spark an accusation that ended in the dungeons of the Inquisition. Once inside, innocence meant little. Torture and interrogation ensured that confessions, however false, were extracted. The machinery of faith demanded proof of guilt, and if none was found, it was manufactured through agony. Women were particularly vulnerable, not only because they were viewed as spiritually weaker, but because the Inquisition saw their bodies as instruments of temptation and sin. Female independence, even the faintest spark of resistance, threatened the patriarchal order. By targeting women, the Inquisition reinforced both religious authority and male dominance, silencing voices that dared to speak out of turn. To understand the terror of these years, one must picture the world of a village under suspicion. An innocent act, a woman mixing herbs for medicine or speaking too boldly in public, could turn to disaster overnight. Soon, she would be dragged before judges, her fate sealed by men who believed her very body was a gateway to evil. In the courtroom, language itself was a weapon. A woman's character was twisted into a confession before she had even spoken. Was she outspoken? Then she was dangerous. Was she quiet? Then she was hiding something. Did she refuse to confess? Proof of guilt. Did she break down under questioning? Proof of guilt as well. The system was designed to condemn, not to protect. Once accused, the descent into horror began. Shackles, blindfolds, and cold stone walls became her reality. She would hear the cries of others from the darkness, each scream a reminder of what awaited her. The purpose was not only to inflict pain, but to strip away humanity, to leave a woman broken in body and spirit before her final sentence was delivered. This was the true birth of fear under the Inquisition, a world where innocence offered no safety, where the mere act of being a woman could condemn you to unspeakable suffering. The Church cloaked its actions in righteousness, claiming to save souls through fire and steel. But in truth, it built a culture of silence and obedience, enforced not by faith, but by terror. By the end of the 15th century, countless women had vanished into the dungeons, their names erased, their bodies mutilated, their stories buried under the weight of holy judgment. What survived was not their voices, but the echo of their screams, a haunting reminder that in the Inquisition's war on heresy, the greatest victims were often those least able to defend themselves. This was only the beginning. For what awaited these women was not simply imprisonment or execution, but a machinery of torture so ingeniously cruel that it would haunt history forever. Devices forged in iron, sharpened by the hands of men who believed pain could purify the soul. The age of torture had begun. The name itself carries a chilling weight, The Iron Virgin. More widely remembered as the Iron Maiden, this device became one of the most infamous symbols of the Inquisition's cruelty. Though historians debate whether its earliest forms were truly used during the Inquisition or perfected later, there's no doubt that the idea behind it, a coffin lined with iron spikes, closing in silence around the human body, reflects the darkest psychology of medieval punishment. For women accused of impurity, heresy, or disobedience, it was a fate designed to terrify even before it claimed its victim. The device appeared as a tall iron sarcophagus, shaped to resemble a woman, often painted with serene, almost saintly features on its outer shell. But inside lay the reality, rows of sharpened spikes, positioned with deliberate precision. They were not meant to kill quickly. Instead, they were placed to pierce the flesh in dozens of places: arms, legs, shoulders, back, avoiding immediate death by missing the heart or vital organs. A woman locked within this virgin might bleed slowly for hours, her body trapped upright, her screams muffled by iron walls. Why such a device? The Inquisition sought more than punishment, it sought spectacle. The Iron Virgin represented a twisted fusion of religious symbolism and sadism. By giving the coffin the appearance of a saintly figure, it mocked purity itself. For women, the irony was bitter and cruel, to be embraced not by mercy, but by steel. The victim was literally swallowed by an icon of supposed virtue, consumed in a parody of salvation. Accounts of its use describe the unbearable psychological terror it invoked. Prisoners would be led into the chamber where the Iron Virgin stood waiting, its doors open like welcoming arms. The sight alone was often enough to break resistance. Some confessed immediately, desperate to avoid being shut inside. But for those who refused, the ritual was performed with chilling precision. The condemned would be stripped, forced into the coffin, and the doors would close slowly, each creak of iron a final farewell to the outside world. Women who entered the Iron Virgin did not emerge whole. If they survived the initial closing, they would remain standing in agony, pierced by steel that kept them conscious but immobilized. Death, when it came, was drawn out. Infection, blood loss, or sheer exhaustion claimed the body long after the soul had given up. The cruelty lay not only in the pain but in the silence. Unlike the rack or the strappado, which echoed with cries, the Iron Virgin consumed its victims in isolation, leaving the dungeon haunted by quiet suffering. Symbolically, it was an instrument of erasure. To be sealed in the Iron Virgin was to vanish, hidden from witnesses, transformed into nothing more than a body inside a hollow idol. For women accused of witchcraft, adultery, or heresy, it was as though society itself wished to bury them alive inside an image of false sanctity. The device did not merely kill, it mocked the very idea of purity, punishing women for failing to live up to impossible standards. The legend of the Iron Virgin spread quickly. Whether or not every account of its use was true, its reputation did the work of torture without a single nail touching flesh. Villages whispered of it, mothers warned their daughters, and accused women trembled at the thought of being embraced by the Virgin. It became a psychological weapon, proof that the Inquisition could invent terrors more imaginative than death itself. The truth is that the Iron Virgin, whether rarely used or more symbolic than practical, reveals something deeper about the Inquisition's mindset. It was not content with execution. It demanded ritual. It sought to turn punishment into theater, cruelty into a demonstration of absolute control. And for women, the lesson was clear: resist, and you would not only be destroyed but mocked, swallowed, and erased by the very ideal society claimed to honor. The Iron Virgin stands today not just as an artifact of torture, but as a mirror of the Inquisition's twisted soul, a reminder that the deadliest prisons are not only built of iron, but of fear sanctified by faith. Among the most grotesque inventions attributed to the Spanish Inquisition was a small, seemingly simple device that carried a weight of unimaginable cruelty. It was called the Pear of Anguish. At first glance, it appeared harmless, a pear-shaped piece of metal, smooth on the outside, with a mechanism at its base. But when the screw was turned, the device expanded, its petals forcing outward inside whatever body cavity it had been placed. The cruelty of this device was not in its size, but in its purpose. It was designed to be inserted into the most intimate places of the human body, the mouth, the rectum, or for women, the womb. Once inside, it was twisted open, tearing flesh, crushing tissue, and inflicting agony without mercy. The expansion did not cause quick death, but prolonged torment. Victims were left bleeding, humiliated, and broken, often scarred for life even if they survived. For women, the Pear of Anguish carried a special kind of horror. Inserted into the vagina, it became an act of ritualized violence, stripping them not only of dignity but of identity. A woman accused of adultery, blasphemy, or witchcraft could be subjected to this tool under the guise of extracting truth. But its true purpose was domination, the assertion that her body belonged not to herself, but to the tribunal that judged her. The womb, sacred as the source of life, was turned into a battlefield of punishment. Placed into the mouth, the pear silenced those who dared to speak against the church. A woman accused of spreading lies or heretical thoughts could be gagged in this most violent way. Her jaw forced open, her teeth shattered, her tongue torn. It was a punishment meant not only to mutilate, but to remind others of the cost of a dangerous word. Speech itself became a crime paid for in blood. The psychological torment was just as profound as the physical. To face the pear was to confront a terror that entered the body itself. Unlike the rack or the strappado, which displayed pain publicly, the pear worked in private shame. It weaponized intimacy, turning the most vulnerable parts of a woman's body into sites of cruelty. Many who heard of its use confessed before ever seeing it, their imagination doing the torturer's work. Historians debate how widely the Pear of Anguish was used. Some argue it was more symbolic than practical, an artifact exaggerated over time. Yet whether myth or reality, its existence in the imagination of the Inquisition was enough to spread fear. The very idea that such a device could be used on women reinforced submission, silencing voices before they dared to rise. What makes the pear unforgettable is not only the pain it inflicted, but what it represented, the complete subjugation of the human body to power. It was not meant to kill outright. It was meant to humiliate, to desecrate, to show that no part of a woman's body was beyond the reach of cruelty cloaked in faith. The Pear of Anguish remains one of the darkest reminders of the Inquisition's legacy. A device so small, yet capable of delivering terror that far outlasted its victims, echoing through history as a symbol of how far human beings will go to silence, degrade, and destroy those they fear. Among the many devices of cruelty employed during the Inquisition, few reveal the depths of misogyny as clearly as the breast ripper. This tool was designed with a singular, horrifying purpose: to mutilate and destroy what society considered the very symbol of womanhood, the breast. Its iron claws were crafted to tear, rip, and disfigure, leaving behind wounds that not only caused excruciating pain, but permanently stripped women of the physical identity tied to motherhood and femininity. The device itself was simple, yet unspeakably brutal. It consisted of sharp iron prongs, often heated until glowing red, fixed to a handle or bar. Once clamped onto the breast, the claws would be torn away violently, shredding flesh, muscle, and skin. Some versions were used to pull and mutilate, others to brand and burn. The result was the same: irreversible destruction. For many women, this punishment was a slow death, as infection or blood loss followed the initial agony. Why target the breasts? The Inquisition was not merely interested in extracting confessions. It sought to strike at symbols. To destroy a woman's breasts was to attack her capacity for nurturing, for giving life, for representing purity and family. It was a way of declaring that the accused was not only guilty, but stripped of the qualities that defined her as a woman. In cases of alleged adultery, blasphemy, or witchcraft, the punishment became a spectacle, a message to all who watched that disobedience would not only be punished, but erased. The brutality of this device reveals how deeply the Inquisition's violence was gendered. Men might be stretched, beaten, or burned, but women faced punishments aimed at the very essence of their bodies. A woman accused of seduction or witchcraft was seen not only as a threat to faith, but as a corrupter of society's moral order. By mutilating her breasts, the Inquisition turned her supposed sin into a grotesque lesson. Her body became both a target and a warning. Eyewitness accounts described the scenes as both horrifying and deliberate. Victims were often paraded before their executioners, their punishment carried out in view of others to maximize shame. The smell of burning flesh, the sight of torn skin, and the screams of the condemned created an atmosphere of terror that extended far beyond the dungeon walls. Women who survived bore permanent scars, their mutilation marking them as outcasts, reminders of the church's authority etched onto their flesh. The breast ripper was not always fatal in the immediate sense, but survival was, in some ways, a punishment of its own. Women who endured the torture carried their disfigurement into the world beyond, shunned, broken, and stripped of dignity. Their scars spoke louder than any confession, branding them forever as sinners in the eyes of their communities. In this way, the Inquisition extended its control beyond the walls of the torture chamber, ensuring that its victims lived as living warnings. Symbolically, the device stands as one of the clearest windows into the psychology of the Inquisition. It shows how torture was not only about truth or confession, but about domination, humiliation, and annihilation of identity. By turning the most nurturing part of the female body into a site of destruction, the Inquisition transformed motherhood itself into a battlefield, one where no woman could feel safe. The breast ripper remains a haunting reminder of how cruelty cloaked in righteousness could turn human flesh into an arena of horror. It is remembered not only as an instrument of pain, but as a weapon of symbolic violence, a tool that sought to destroy the essence of what it meant to be a woman in a world ruled by fear. Of all the devices remembered from the Inquisition, none symbolizes raw physical torment as vividly as the rack. Unlike smaller, more intimate instruments of cruelty, the rack was a spectacle of suffering, a massive wooden frame designed to stretch the human body beyond its natural limits. Its purpose was straightforward yet devastating: to tear the body apart while keeping the victim alive, forcing confessions through unbearable agony. The design was cruelly simple. Prisoners were bound by their wrists and ankles to ropes wound around rollers at either end of a sturdy wooden platform. At the command of the torturer, the rollers were turned, slowly pulling the limbs in opposite directions. The body strained, muscles tore, and joints dislocated one by one. The sound of snapping ligaments filled the chamber, punctuated by screams that could echo through stone walls. Death rarely came quickly. The goal was suffering, not release. For women, the rack carried a particular layer of vulnerability. Their smaller frames and less muscular builds often meant bones shattered sooner, and injuries left them permanently disabled even if they survived. Beyond the physical torment, there was humiliation. Women were frequently stripped before being bound to the device, their exposed bodies turning the torture into a public degradation as well as a physical assault. The pain was doubled by the shame, and both were weaponized to silence resistance. What made the rack so terrifying was its gradual nature. Unlike the sudden violence of the breast ripper or the piercing spikes of the Iron Virgin, the rack destroyed the body inch by inch. A prisoner could feel their limbs stretching, hear their joints crack, and know that worse was still to come. Torturers controlled the pace with calculated precision, tightening the ropes, pausing for confessions, then resuming when the victim faltered. It was not only torture. It was psychological warfare. Many victims confessed to crimes they never committed. Under the relentless pull of the rack, truth and lies became indistinguishable. A woman accused of witchcraft might admit to flying with demons, not because she believed it, but because her body could no longer withstand the torment. In this way, the rack produced confessions that satisfied the Inquisition's narrative, regardless of reality. The device was less about uncovering truth than about manufacturing obedience. Survivors were often left crippled, their bodies twisted and deformed. Arms and legs hung useless, shoulders permanently dislocated, spines warped. These survivors became living reminders of the Inquisition's power, walking evidence of what happened to those who resisted. Their suffering extended long after the torture chamber, turning every step, every breath, into a continuation of punishment. The rack's presence in the Inquisition highlights the cold logic of fear. It was not a tool of execution, but of domination, designed to keep the victim alive long enough to confess, to scream, to serve as proof of the Church's authority. Its legacy endures because it represents more than pain. It reveals the deliberate, methodical destruction of the human body for power. In the end, the rack was not merely wood and rope. It was a statement that the Inquisition could bend flesh, bone, and spirit to its will, and that mercy had no place in a system built upon fear. If the rack symbolized the slow tearing apart of the human frame, the strappado was its cruel twin, a device that inflicted agony through suspension, dislocation, and humiliation. Unlike the grandeur of the rack, the strappado required only ropes and pulleys. Yet in its simplicity lay one of the most excruciating methods of torture used during the Inquisition. The process was merciless. The prisoner's hands were bound tightly behind the back, wrists tied together. A rope fastened to the wrists was then threaded over a pulley fixed to the ceiling. At the command of the Inquisitor, the victim was hoisted into the air, dangling by their arms twisted unnaturally behind them. Within seconds, the shoulders dislocated, ligaments tore, and the weight of the body pulled joints apart with sickening cracks. For women, the strappado was particularly cruel. Their smaller frames often gave way faster, and the position exposed them to unbearable vulnerability. Many were stripped before being hoisted, their suffering displayed before male judges and officials. Torture became not only a physical ordeal, but a public humiliation, a deliberate assault on dignity as well as flesh. The silence of the chamber was broken only by the groans of ropes and the piercing cries of victims as their bodies were pulled apart inch by inch. The torment did not end there. To intensify the pain, torturers often added sudden drops, allowing the victim to fall a short distance before being stopped abruptly. The violent jerk wrenched shoulders further out of their sockets, sometimes fracturing arms or tearing muscles completely. This method, known as the reverse hanging, was designed to prolong agony while keeping the victim alive, conscious, and capable of confession. Unlike execution, the strappado rarely killed outright. That was not its purpose. Its aim was to break the will. Victims often fainted from shock, only to be revived and hoisted again. The cycle could last for hours, each session leaving permanent damage. Women who survived the strappado often carried twisted arms, hunched shoulders, or useless limbs for the rest of their lives, living testaments to the Inquisition's grip. Psychological torment was inseparable from the physical. The mere sight of the rope and pulley was often enough to force confessions before the victim even left the ground. Stories of the strappado spread quickly through villages, ensuring that fear did the work of torture even before the device was used. Women accused of witchcraft or heresy knew what awaited them. Silence and submission became tools of survival. In many accounts, women confessed to impossible crimes, flying through the night sky, consorting with demons, poisoning wells. These confessions were not born of truth, but of shattered bodies and broken spirits. The Inquisition cared little for accuracy. What mattered was compliance, the visible proof of authority enforced by suffering. The strappado embodies the essence of inquisitorial cruelty: simple, efficient, and devastating. It required no elaborate machinery, only rope, pulleys, and the willingness to disregard human mercy. In its harsh creak and sudden jerks, one hears the echo of a system built on fear, where survival depended not on innocence but on obedience. Through the strappado, the Inquisition reminded the world that flesh could be broken, voices silenced, and spirits subdued, all in the name of faith. If there was one device that revealed the Inquisition's fear of words more than wounds, it was the scold's bridle. Unlike the rack or the strappado, which mangled the body, this device was aimed squarely at the voice, the power of speech itself. Women who dared to speak too freely, question authority, or simply resist their prescribed silence risked being forced into this cage of humiliation. The scold's bridle, also known as the Brank's bridle, was a metal framework locked around a woman's head. Shaped like an iron cage, it encased the skull tightly, often fitted with grotesque decorations to add mockery to pain. But the most brutal feature lay inside: a flat, spiked plate pressed against or piercing into the tongue. Once locked in place, the victim could not speak, eat, or cry out without stabbing her own mouth. Words became impossible. Silence was enforced with iron. Though not always fatal, the device stripped victims of their humanity. A woman wearing the bridle was paraded through the streets, a spectacle of shame for her community. Crowds gathered to jeer, laugh, or hurl insults as the condemned stumbled under the weight of the iron cage. For the Inquisition, it was a punishment as much psychological as physical. The purpose was to erase dignity, turning a woman into a living warning against disobedience. Women most often condemned to the scold's bridle were those accused of gossip, slander, or heresy. Midwives, widows, and outspoken wives were easy targets. In a society where female silence was equated with virtue, any woman who spoke too much risked being branded a danger. By silencing them with iron, the Inquisition reinforced the notion that women's voices were threats that must be controlled, contained, and punished. The cruelty of the device was amplified by its symbolism. The bridle resembled a grotesque parody of a crown, transforming the wearer into a mock queen of shame. Some bridles were even decorated with devilish faces or animal features, reducing the victim to an object of ridicule. The physical pain of pierced tongues and bruised jaws was accompanied by humiliation that could destroy reputations long after the device was removed. Survivors of the bridle bore lasting damage. Tongues were scarred, teeth broken, jaws misaligned. But perhaps worse was the silence imposed afterward. Many women, once outspoken, were left unable or unwilling to speak again. Their voices stolen by fear as much as by iron. The community, too, internalized the message: if the church could silence one woman so completely, others would do well to remain quiet. Unlike some devices that aim to extract confessions, the scold's bridle was never about truth. It was about power. It was not concerned with lies or evidence, but with obedience. A woman did not need to be guilty of great heresy to be bridled. Her only crime could be defiance, a refusal to bow her head in silence. The scold's bridle reminds us that torture was not always about tearing flesh. Sometimes it was about crushing the spirit. By attacking the voice, the very means by which a person resists, the Inquisition struck at the core of human dignity. It was a cage not just for the mouth, but for the soul. If the Spanish Inquisition was infamous for its cruelty, it was equally infamous for its theatricality. Torture was not always hidden in the shadows of a dungeon. Often, it was staged as a ritual, a performance of power meant to terrify entire communities. The punishment of women, in particular, became a spectacle where pain, shame, and fear were paraded in public view. Unlike the private agony of the rack or the Iron Virgin, public humiliation was designed to leave no one untouched. A woman forced into chains, dragged through the streets, or bound in a device like the scold's bridle, became both victim and warning. Her suffering was not only for her own correction, but for the submission of every onlooker. The message was clear: defy the church, and you will not only be broken, you will be humiliated before the eyes of your world. Some of these humiliations were brutally symbolic. Women accused of gossip or witchcraft were marched with mocking costumes, horns upon their heads, devils painted onto their garments, or placards naming their sins. Others were made to carry heavy crosses through town, mimicking Christ's own suffering, except twisted into a parody of salvation. The spectacle was not just punishment, but theater, designed to fuse cruelty with religion, humiliation with ritual. The most chilling aspect was the audience. Entire communities gathered to watch women suffer. Children jeered, neighbors mocked, men laughed. In this shared cruelty, the church transformed torture into collective discipline. The crowd became complicit, learning to fear by participating in mockery. For the victim, the physical pain was devastating, but the psychological destruction, the stripping away of dignity, reputation, and belonging, was often worse. Ritual humiliation ensured that punishment lingered long after the device was removed. A woman publicly shamed could never fully escape the memory of her degradation. Whispers followed her for years, sometimes even after death. Families bore the stain of dishonor. In this way, the Inquisition's cruelty extended far beyond the individual. It poisoned entire bloodlines with fear. For the Inquisitors, ritual humiliation was an efficient weapon. It required little iron, less blood, but carried enormous power. A woman did not have to die to be destroyed. It was enough to make her a spectacle. In the end, these rituals remind us that torture was not just about breaking bones. It was about breaking spirit, identity, and community itself. The Inquisition did not simply kill the body. It killed dignity in full view of the world. The Spanish Inquisition ended centuries ago, but its shadow has never truly faded. Its devices may rest in museums, its courts dissolved into history, yet the memory of its cruelty continues to haunt our understanding of power, gender, and control. For women, the legacy is especially heavy. They were not only punished but symbolically erased, reduced to silence, shame, and suffering by instruments forged in the name of faith. What makes the Inquisition so chilling is not just its brutality, but its persistence. For over 3 centuries, women lived with the constant threat that a careless word, a neighbor's suspicion, or the wrong practice of faith could place them under suspicion. Once accused, few could hope to emerge with dignity intact. Torture was not only a tool of confession, it was a weapon of submission, teaching generation after generation that resistance was dangerous and silence was survival. The devices themselves, the iron virgin, the rack, the scold's bridle, were not only instruments of pain but symbols of systemic control. Each was a physical manifestation of fear, silence enforced with spikes, flesh torn to reveal obedience, bodies humiliated to warn others of the consequences of dissent. In this way, the Inquisition extended beyond the dungeon walls, shaping the very structure of society. The echoes of these punishments did not die with their victims. They lived on in whispered family histories, in folk memory, in the quiet warnings mothers passed down to daughters about obedience and discretion. Even after the Inquisition was formally abolished, its psychological scars lingered, reinforcing patriarchal dominance and the expectation of female silence for centuries to come. Today, when these devices are displayed in museums, they appear as relics of a distant barbarism. Yet their lesson remains disturbingly relevant. They remind us how institutions can cloak cruelty in ritual, how fear can masquerade as faith, and how entire societies can be conditioned to watch suffering as spectacle. Most hauntingly, they remind us that the first target of authoritarian power is often the vulnerable voice, the one deemed too inconvenient, too disruptive, too dangerous to be allowed. The Spanish Inquisition may have ended, but its legacy lives on in the stories of those silenced women. Their suffering is not only a warning from the past, but a mirror held up to the present, proof of how easily cruelty can be disguised as justice, and how swiftly dignity can be destroyed when power is absolute. The shadows remain, and they demand to be remembered.